Good morning, everyone. It's January 18th, 2020. I'm Eric. I'm here at Zero Hedge, and the article, Human Rights Watch, China is existential threat to global freedom. This comes from Steve Watson via Summit News. So, this article talks a lot about China and their human rights abuses, and they have no shortage of these. I'm going to go through this article, and we will compare China to other nations, such as ours, and see if most of these governments aren't, existential threats to world freedom. Non-governmental organization Human Rights Watch warned Wednesday that if China continues to go unchecked, it threatens to enslave the entire global population and eviscerate freedom for good. And I think we're probably near that point where freedom will be gone for good if we, the people, don't act. But Human Rights Watch has an annual report. The think tank cautioned that communist Chinese government is using technology, censorship, and violent repression to such an effective extent that it threatens to fundamentally undermine international human rights forever. And I hate to say this, but human rights have been undermined forever already. Has there been a time in human history where human rights were not seriously violated? I don't think so. In quotes, Beijing has long suppressed domestic critics. Now, the Chinese government is trying to extend that censorship to the rest of the world. And this is true. They are. What was the name of that movie? Red Dawn. The remake. The first Red Dawn, I think. I'm not sure about that one. But I know for sure the second Red Dawn, the remake, was supposed to feature Chinese troops. And China objected to this. They objected, and what happened? They had to reshoot a large portion of this movie as a result. Not a bad movie, by the way. Human Rights Watch declared that China is now engaged in the most intense attack ever on freedom, and that President Xi Jinping's government is executing the most brutal and pervasive oppression that China has seen for decades, including the implementation of nightmarish surveillance systems. So listen, the United States, our government, has this very same surveillance system. There is not a keystroke on your keyboard that is not recorded somewhere. The United States has completely turned its back on our founding principles, and has led the world in in a lot of bad things, such as censorship, such as silencing people with new technologies, among so many others. But let's get back to China. The report outlines how China is using its might to systemically silence political dissidents, religious groups, and ethnic minorities. And here in the United States, they do not have to go through such lengths to silence political dissidents or religious groups, because we already do that for them. The report is so damning that Beijing banned Human Rights Watch Executive Director Kenneth Roth from traveling to Hong Kong to attend an event to release it. Instead, the report was launched at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The report also criticized the UN, other countries, and global corporations for not doing enough to stand up to China, accusing them of being willing accomplices, of enabling the crackdown, and turning a blind eye to a dystopian future in which no one is beyond the reach of Chinese censors. And of course, here in the United States, on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, most of these platforms, we already are silenced. We are already nearing that dystopian future just in the actions of our own government, let alone China. Understand that I am not a fan of China in the least bit. Understand that I'm not a fan of Iran in the least bit. I'm not a fan of any of these governments because they are all threats. And I think the University of Hawaii publication on democide, a term that was coined by the author of that paper, and the name of the person escapes me at the moment, but in this paper, as most of you know or document, the findings were that governments in the 20th century killed, a very, very, very large sum of non-combatant people, meaning women, children, and men who were not part of any military. I do believe it was somewhere around 265 million to 300 million people dead at the hands of government. I would call that dystopian, wouldn't you? Far from being spurred as a global pariah, the Chinese government is courted the world over. Its unelected president receiving red carpet treatment wherever he goes. And the country hosting prestigious events such as the 2022 Winter Olympics, Roth noted. The aim is to portray China as open and welcoming, powerful, even as it descends into even more ruthless autocratic rules. And don't we see some of the same things unfolding right here on our own soil? Don't we have political operatives suggesting that certain types of individuals should be put in re-education camps? Don't we have that? Do we not have standing camps for just such a thing? Didn't we intern innocent Japanese, along with Germans, during World War II? That sounds pretty dystopian to me. Isn't it dystopian when your local law enforcement has the ability to completely destroy your life without much, if any, evidence? Isn't that dystopian? Isn't that nightmarish? In quotes, while other governments commit serious human rights violations, no other government flexes its political muscles with such vigor and determination to undermine the international human rights standards and institutions that could hold it to account. Now, I recall a certain Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, talking about killing 500,000 children. And, the price being worth those young lives. Does the United States not flex its standing as the world reserve currency to the detriment of other nations? Nations, by the way, who've really not done anything to us. The report also criticizes the U.S., but conceded that the Trump administration is one government that has been willing to stand up to China. I think the author, Mr. Roth, is a little bit delusioned about the Trump administration's willingness to stand up to the Chinese government. He is simply trying to act as if he is attempting to get the best trade deal possible. That's not really standing up for the people of China who are, kidnapped in the middle of the night for their organs. And by the way, if you think that things like that don't happen in the United States, you too are delusioned. It does. It's just hidden. Whereas the Chinese government, they just don't give a fuck. They do what they want. Here in the U.S. and Canada and all the rest of the NATO countries, a lot of them, our governments put puts on this veneer of freedom and liberty, and in the shadows, people get disappeared. People get put into prison in this country for the most minute bullshit. Prisons should be reserved only for the worst people that you know are dangerous. Like child molesters. But instead of keeping child molesters locked up, what do? They release them much earlier than they should, if at all. They give them slaps on the wrists while sending other people to prison for decades for stolen candy bars or bags of pot. Well, let's take it one step further and even say heroin. Meanwhile, rapists, they get away with their crimes because the police labs, the law enforcement labs, are too fucking lazy to process these rape kits. Meanwhile, you have police in this country every day violating the human rights of America's citizens. And this guy has the nerve. And again, I have no love for the Chinese government. None. They're scum, just like our government officials are scum. They're all scum. Oh, let me see here. So, yes, the Trump administration has stood up to China, but not for its human rights abuses. They stood up to China over trade. There's a big difference there, don't you think? Did this trade deal include, saving the people from Foxconn from suicide? Because their lives are so miserable that they go to the top of this building and jump off. And by the way, we have a similar situation going on here in America with record suicides. This article, this person, this Human Rights Watch organization, is solely pointing the finger at China when the finger should be pointed at each and every government on this planet. They all violate human rights. All of them. Look at our willingness to sanction a country into oblivion, starving their citizens. Look at our willingness to back a regime, the Saudi regime, who had a major role in the worst terrorist attack on this soil in history in Yemen. The warnings come as Trump continues to push for restrictions on Chinese technology, including the exclusion of Huawei technologies from the trade deal, and the grounding of more than 1,000 civil drones owing to fears of espionage because they use Chinese technology. Details also continue to emerge regarding claims by an anonymous informer or former market. Details also continue to emerge regarding claims by an anonymous former Microsoft contractor that the Chinese government is able to access and listen to Skype conversations and audio from Cortana's Microsoft voice assistant equivalent of Apple's Siri. And, by the way, our own government has the ability and does do the exact same thing. The Human Rights Watch report demands their foreign bank accounts be frozen. They should fear prosecution for their crimes. Meanwhile, we bomb busloads of children, women, starve the people of Yemen into oblivion. We aid the world's biggest sponsor of terror, Saudi Arabia, not Iran. And we are responsible for the overthrow of numerous governments at the detriment of the citizens of these countries. Am I wrong? But let me guess. Somebody out there is going to say, "You're not a patriot." I don't fucking care if I'm a patriot or not. Matter of fact, I don't want that label. To call me a patriot is to assume that I'm so delusioned and brainwashed that I'd actually support a country like this, like China, like Canada, like France, like England, and not a patriot. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. But you have to look at your own country. Look at your own nation here. And ask yourself, are we really that much different? Are we? Because I don't see that we are. I really, really don't. For example, the behavior of our law enforcement community. And I talk about these people a lot. Now, I know a lot of you probably love your policemen, but they're no different than the policemen in China, Russia. These places that are dystopian in their own right. Here at the Free Thought Project, cops mistake medical emergency for drug use. Viciously beat man with batons. This happened in St. Johns County, Florida. We already know what happened, though. We already know. The police overreacted to something that required no violence whatsoever. Let's see if the video plays.
Tonight, a lawyer representing a man who was tased and then repeatedly hit by Johnson County deputies says this is one of the worst cases of police brutality he has seen locally.
It's just so abusive and goes along. It just goes on for so long.
Here's the video we showed you Monday after Christopher Butler was pulled over December 29th by FHP. The trooper tased him, and then you can see St. Johns County deputies hitting, trying to get Butler to lay still. 3 St. Johns County deputies have been put on leave with pay pending an investigation. And as news protection reporter Jim Hagan tells us, Butler's family has now hired a Jacksonville attorney who specializes in police brutality cases.
In police reports, it says Christopher Butler wasn't cooperating, and that's why he was tased by FHP and then beaten and kicked by other St. Johns County deputies. But Attorney John Phillips says it's much worse than what we can see and hear in the video.
They just kicked him and used the baton and tased him over and over again, sometimes yelling taser after they tased him. It's, again, one of the worst cases of police brutality I've ever seen.
In police reports, it says an evaluation of Butler at the hospital showed he was under the influence of PCP, or the street thing, angel dust. That's why he fought back and appeared resistant to the taser and beating.
He was not high on PCP. Any statement to that effect is going to result in defamation. He was having, as we understand it, a diabetic or blood sugar event throughout the course of this. Regardless, even if he was hopped on.
Okay, so, in America, if you have a diabetic event or an epilepsy event or any other kind of event that makes you unable to communicate properly, they take that as resisting and a legitimate reason to kill you, to beat you, to cage you. So again, how are we any different than the nations, our government, our press, our Human Rights Watch organizations criticize? I would say that we're not. We're not any different. We may go about these things differently. We may hide them. But at the end of the day, abuse is abuse, whether it's hidden or out in the open. And you, the American people, tolerate this abuse. Anyway, thought I would talk to you about this. Again, I'm not a fan of China. I'm not a fan of any government on this planet. They're all evil. They all abuse their citizens. Some are more dystopian than others, but at the end of the day, dystopian is dystopian. And it's only going to get worse if you, me, and the rest of humanity don't stand up and do what we fucking need to do. Till next time, kill the state, live free.